And we're back with another episode of
What the?
Shell Podcast. We're pretty excited today. This is actually the first time that I've engaged in real conversation with this guest. I'm pretty excited because the first time I came across him was in our old Diamondback Terrapin group when I came across pictures of him working with those Mississippi or Texan terrapins. And I was really excited. And then just by chance, I happened to come across his Instagram page before I even added him as a friend on Facebook. That might have happened today, like 10 minutes ago. But yeah, I mean, I think I accidentally messaged him asking him if he sold Florida box turtles at one point because I saw him posting so many pictures of them. But I'm pretty excited. And I think this might be the real Jordan the Turtle Man. I don't know if our other guy was the real Jordan the Turtle Man.
I don't know. We're gonna have to find that out. We're gonna have to do like a triage and have like.
I think we should do a which one of these Jordans is the real Turtle Man? Put them side by side, and maybe
Or just fire off questions, bro. First one to answer, buzzer, man. Come on.
we could auction them off for a date and see which one gets more money, and then donate that money to their charity.
But
it's a turtle.
You're shooting for the stars there, brother, man. I mean, I got all suited up for you tonight and everything. That's the first time I'm wearing an actual shirt. Ain't you happy? All for you, baby.
I'm happy it's not a muscle shirt, man. I'm over here with the flub shirts, you know?
Come on, bro. All right. Yeah, I'm excited too, just because we're, it's good having people from all different kind of backgrounds, especially people that are actually in the field and actually working. And, there's one thing to do it as a hobby, but, it's another, aspect to actually be doing it, and also actually being in the education realm that, being on the front line, as I would probably like to call it, so it's going to be good to hear from the front line man and seeing how he got started.
No, I think I'm most excited. Last week we talked to Jenna, a wildlife biologist in Florida, and we're keeping it back, kind of local for us. Granted, he's kind of far away from myself. I'm up in North Florida, but, still he's in Florida doing work, and we want to get that out. So
yeah, definitely, especially with all the stuff going on.
Agreed, man. Without further ado, let's go ahead and add Jordan to the stream.
The real Jordan.
The real Jordan. Welcome, man. We're glad to have you on the podcast today.
Glad to be here, folks.
What's happening?
Not much. Just working on turtle stuff. Been out in the field all day, so if I seem a little tired, it's because I am, because we were walking miles and miles in the field today catching turtles. So
seems like that's all you've been doing the past couple of weeks on a post, man.
It basically is all.
And look, if you're actually out there in the field, like, I know what that is down in the south, dude. Like, that is like, it's not just like some herping, we hear from other people in the mountains, and it's all nice and cute going through the nice, cool, crisp woods. Down here.
Salamander biologists, man, they get those cool mountain streams. You're like, oh, it's so wonderful. Field work is so great. Come down to Southwest Florida for one.
Come on, bro.
And then let me know how you feel.
Let's see how much you really love what you do.
We walked like 6 miles in Coastal Club today. It was just, it was a hot one.
Did you leave a breadcrumb trail to find your way back?
Yeah. Thankfully, our GPS signals are pretty strong where we were at, so we were able to find our way back out pretty easy.
Because you do a lot of radio telemetry, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love doing that back when I was doing it in school. That was like the coolest thing. Like, we had our professors used to hide it under like rocks up behind the Red X mountain hill, and you had to literally climb this mountain to try to find this little detector on the rock. It's like holding this big clanking thing.
Yep. And then add to that like a turtle that sometimes is moving and running from you as you're chasing, and a bunch of vegetation, and it gets even more fun in the hot sun. So,
dude, I tap my hat off to you, bro. Literally.
Yeah. But it's fun though. You gotta love it. So, and my students seem to all really love it. So it makes it easier that way. So,
I think we should go ahead and find out a little bit about yourself. Sure. Can you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started with turtles, man?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's going to sound cliche, but it all goes back to that turtle moment. I think Gordon Gray talks about turtle moments, and he's probably a little bit more descriptive and a better storyteller than I am. But I was probably, I was probably, hey, I don't disagree.
Dude, I'm trying to wake you up, man. I mean, you're already smiling, so come on.
But yeah, so but I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and I'd always been obsessed with like dinosaurs as a kid, you know, like most kids are. I was 4 or 5 years old, and I was down in Fort Myers, where I grew up, and there was a box turtle in our front yard, and I was just blown away. I mean, this beautiful black and yellow turtle was crawling in our front yard, and I was just obsessed with it. I just wanted to look at it. And my dad eventually made me, let it go to go on its way. But man, like ever since then, it was just kind of, I was hooked. And I've just always been into turtles ever since, and other reptiles too, of course. I mean, I'm a herpetologist in general, and I've always kind of known I wanted to do that career path, which is very fortunate. A lot of people, don't know what they want to do at first, but I've been locked in since a really young age, and I've always wanted to work with herps and been able to live the dream. But I did various things like growing up, working at local nature centers. We got this place called the Clusa Nature Center down here in Fort Myers, Florida. I kind of cut my jib there, working with animals and doing like presentations for visitors and things like that. Got to work with a lot of captive care stuff before I ended up going to college. The college I currently teach at, Florida Southwestern State College, is formerly Edison Community College. I actually went there myself as a student, and then graduated, went to a 4-year program at Florida Gulf Coast University, where I really kind of got my first hands-on research with my mentor. His name is Dr. Phil Allman. Never be able to repay that guy for just getting me out in the field and teaching me how to conduct proper research and to really kind of impact conservation. So he got me working on emided turtles, which are your typical pond sliders and things like that. So we worked with red bellies and peninsula cooter turtles primarily there. And then from there, it kind of spun off. I went and did some studying overseas. I worked in Africa for like 3.5 months.
Wow.
Dropped the turtles when I was in Africa to work with crocodiles. But it was a pretty cool trade-off to do crocs. It was a lot of fun. And so that was great. But I got to see a lot of amazing stuff over there. I got to see some African side neck turtles. So, I mean, I was going to do some turtling when I was over there, and found some Canixes tortoises, the hingebacks. That was really awesome to see those in the wild, where they come from. And then came back to the States, went to Costa Rica, worked with sea turtles. I don't really talk about sea turtles much because they get enough press. The little turtles that live in the mud don't get talked about, so I'm just going to leave it. I worked with turtles and sea turtles in Costa Rica, and we'll move on from there. And then I went up to graduate school in southeastern Louisiana at Southeastern Louisiana University. It's if anybody is interested in doing herpetology, that is the school to go to, because I'd say 60% of the biology staff has some sort of involvement in herpetological research. The head of the bio department, he's the president of the American Ichthyology and Herpetology Society. So he's an awesome guy, Chris Beach. He's great. My mentor and advisor there is Roldan Valverde. He's a sea turtle guy, but he also does other turtle work. So I made him do terrapin stuff when I went in. So, but great school. Graduated there, and now I'm back down here in Southwest Florida, where I grew up, kind of continuing the trend, teaching biology and talking and working with turtles.
Huh. So you mentioned with the terrapins on the last gig-o, where did that come into play as far as a distinguishing factor, like when you're over there, sea turtles and that?
So I mean, sea turtles are great. I mean, don't get me wrong, sea turtles, they're great. They just, like I said, they just get all the press. I mean, but terrapins have always been like an obsession of mine. They're easily my favorite species. There's not another species that compares to terrapins. They're just the coolest. I mean, just their adaptations living in brackish water, it's just insane that they can do
so
that.
Over there, like that specific Gulf Coast area was like your first interaction with that?
No, my first interaction with diamondback terrapins was down here in South Florida. I worked with my buddy Chris Lekowitz at the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation. They've got a long-term project on diamondback terrapins there, so I was able to been helping with him with that since 2012. Been helping with that project, and I used some of his terrapins down here for my master's research, and then I went up to Louisiana. When I was there, I did some comparative studies with the terrapins up there in the south eastern region of Louisiana, as well as the southwest. Got to go out on an airboat, catch terrapins in a marsh. It was the dream, man. It's the way to do it. So it's pretty awesome. But yeah, so terrapins kind of came into play because I love them. They're so cool, and they're so variable, and despite all the studies that have been done on terrapins by hundreds of different people, there's still so much we don't know about them. And I'm a reproductive biologist at heart, so there was a lot of questions to ask about like their reproduction and their hormones and things like that. And I can get really geeky and sciencey if you guys have questions about that.
Dude, I wanna
Okay.
I don't know if you're up for it, Cody, but like I'm like zeroed in already because like I want to hear this in-depth stuff that you can't find in a book or anything else, bro.
Hey, should I share with him my current situation with one of my terrapins tonight?
Go on.
You can if you want.
All right. So I have a diamondback terrapin that is a mangrove diamondback terrapin.
Okay.
And she was secreting like a mucus out of her cloaca.
Sure.
I took her to the vet. The vet did a test. I can't think of the exact name of the test, looking at the cells in the goop.
Yeah.
And apparently some of the cells are reproductive cells and some are intestinal cells.
Weird.
So she wanted me to wait 2 weeks before doing an x-ray and radiograph.
Okay.
When you said reproductive, I'm like, man, I want to hear more about it because I mean, one, mangroves are amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want her to be healthy, like why not learn as much as I can?
Yeah. That's interesting. So is this like a reproductive issue she's having, or is this just some sort of odd secretion that she's
I don't know if it's a reproductive issue.
Okay.
I'm no expert.
Yeah.
She is of reproductive size.
Sure.
She's probably right at the beginnings.
Okay. So it could be something where maybe she's shifting into that and her cells are just kind of kicking on and things, but that's interesting.
She's also not eating.
Okay. That's not good. Hate to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, some turtles they call it hypophagic, where like when they're like in reproductive mode, hypo meaning low and phagic meaning eating. So they basically shut off their eating if they're reproducing sometimes. But terrapins usually aren't one of the species that does that. Like that's a classic sea turtle, and like some of the other tortoises will do that at certain time periods, and they just focus full on nesting. But yeah, I've never quite heard that in terrapins. That's interesting. So hope she does okay though.
Yeah, man, I'm freaking out. Outside of how much I spent on her, I mean, she's one of my animals. Like, I'm a full believer. If you're not willing to take a turtle to the vet, you probably shouldn't own them. Like
100%.
I mean, I've looked silly taking a stink pot musk turtle that I paid $10 for to the vet.
We had a stink pot that we've had it for a few years, and she got trapped under a log and almost drowned. And her tank gave her CPR, got her back.
I've been there, same thing.
And then took her to the vet, to get just like preventative antibiotics so she didn't develop a pneumonia in the lungs from bringing water in. And it was like $400 or $500. But you know what? you pay it because you love it. So.
Right.
And and having her around, it's great. She's one of my outreach animals that I take to teach with my classes and things like that. So, I mean, you gotta go the extra mile. So,
so any of your outreach ones, any of your personal ones, or are they all pretty much kind of like with school and?
They're pretty much mine, but I use them for outreach. Like when I teach about like diversity, like I'll bring a turtle into school. Like I don't keep any of the turtles. At the school club, I just keep a couple of snakes and spiders, as you can see in the background here. That
I seen them earlier. That's fine.
I don't do snakes or spiders, so you can keep.
I'll do snakes all day long.
Try it, man. Don't knock it.
I do snakes all day long. They ain't slimy, bro. They feel good.
National Snake Day is not on my list of holidays to celebrate.
Fair enough.
But we're all family.
You know what? I've got no problem with people that don't like snakes. It's just my issue is people that just go out of the way to like kill snakes. I'm just like, come on, just let them live. You don't gotta love them. Just let them live. That's all I.
Yeah, because there's an appreciation factor. I mean, you don't have to like anything to appreciate it. I mean, when like you can probably vouch for doing some of the programs like any of the educational programs I used to do. People that used to be like afraid or just have no idea how to handle or even know about the background of an animal, and then once you do the presentation, they're like, they might not come up to it. They will come up to it. They might not touch it, but I mean, you can see in their eyes, like, okay, we're okay here. We're okay. I understand you. You understand, and you can just appreciate value.
Some of those people have never seen a snake like that close, or a turtle
Yeah.
or anything that close, and just to see them be like, oh, not so bad, or oh, that's kind of cool. It's
Yeah.
a really good feeling.
People think they're like invading our area, but
Yeah.
honestly, I mean, we're invading their
They were
area
here
from the
first.
very beginning.
Yeah.
Hey, you mentioned people who haven't seen turtles. I still get amazed. I'm an elementary school teacher,
Oh, nice.
and our class pet was actually one of my Florida box turtles.
Oh, awesome.
I was actually amazed how many kids started off the school year afraid of the box turtle.
Right.
I was like,
see, that's. I mean, I know that's a common thing, like for kids to be scared of things they don't know, but that was never me. Like, I was always like grabbing stuff as a kid, which is probably not. It's probably worse that I was just going out and grabbing things. I mean, I think I was 6 or 7 when I caught my first black racer, and it just lit my arm up. Bit me to shreds.
Oh yeah, them
The
things,
racers
bro.
do when you grab them. But, I mean,
Dude, you just better
was
hang on and just stick your arm out.
I was wanting to grab everything, but yeah, I've seen some of those kids that are just like super, super sort of like wary, like what is that? I mean, but it's really cool to see them kind of come around too when they after a little bit and get around to seeing, oh, these are pretty cool animals.
Yeah,
definitely agree,
so
man.
what was some of the coolest different things with all your research and everything that you found out that you almost like was like an aha, like just going back to like either the reproduction or whatever you might have it, like
Sure.
what's some of the most interesting, top 5 or whatever kind of things that most people be like either what or just like never even would have thought about.
Yeah. So just to give you like a little brief rundown of what the research kind of characterizes, the main thing is I was looking at reproductive hormones that was in the blood of the turtles, because the hormones kind of can give you a lot of information about, okay, are these animals ready to reproduce? When are they reproducing? How often are they reproducing? So if you can kind of map out the hormones, you can kind of get a prediction of when and maybe how frequently they're going to be reproducing. So in Florida, where we got samples from, which is really neat, is we find that the terrapins down here are at minimum in the wild double clutching, but likely triple clutching as well, which is really cool. And we found that out because I actually had a portable ultrasound machine to work with. That you'd use for like a human, and you can actually look at developing egg follicles in real time on these animals. And we're catching these things in like late July into August, and they were still developing like large follicles, which is pretty crazy because if you go up to the northern part of Terrapin's range, usually by August they're petering out. It's like their last nest, but these ones had big viable.
You're talking about like the southern ornate kind of subspecies, or
Yeah.
When you say northern, are you referring to northern ornates or northern diamondback?
I say northern, I mean northern, like Cape Cod.
Yeah, okay.
If it's New Jersey, yeah. When I
Still
say
even
southern,
that
I
late?
talk about like South Florida as a whole, latitudinally, and then when I say northern, I'm talking about like the classic Maryland terrapins up there in the north. So a lot of differences between them. Down here, clutch sizes are smaller, but eggs seem to be generally much bigger. Like clutch sizes are like 6, 7, but much bigger eggs compared to like some of those like 15, 22 clutches you find up in those northern ones. And that's kind of an evolutionary history thing. Just there's this change as you go latitudinally. Probably has to do with temperature stuff, but there's a lot of sort of debate about what's going on with that. But it's pretty neat. But the coolest thing was we caught them in the winter down here. And the winter, Florida winter is not everybody's winter.
It gets cold in North Florida, man.
North Florida is not really Florida, though, right? North Florida is basically
We're South Georgia. Yeah, exactly.
Or Ohio at negative 30 degrees. Come on, bro.
Right.
Give me something else.
So winter here is like, oh, it was 40 degrees last night. That was rough. And now it's 75 during the day. So, but down here we found that they still have these large ovarian follicles even in the wintertime. And it's potential that they may be able to reproduce in the fall and the winter as well compared to just the nesting season. We don't have any confirmation of eggs in the fall or winter yet, but there are a lot of species down here that sort of have like this, what they call it a bimodal nesting season, where they have this peak like in the spring and they have a peak in the fall and winter again. And there are some species down here that you can find nesting every month of the year, like peninsula cooters. You can find them nesting in January. You can find them nesting in December. Florida snappers, you can find them nesting And there's just not been a lot of work done to quantify that. So that's kind of like what I consider to be like my life's work is I want to quantify the reproductive season of South Florida turtles of every species down here. That's kind of what I'm shooting for. So will I get to do it? I don't know. It's a lot of turtles, but we'll see.
Let me ask you.
And obviously, you think it's because of the temperature, right? Just
Absolutely.
because I mean, you're talking about north. They almost like they eat and just almost hang on to what they got. It's almost like I'm relating it to deer hunting.
Yeah.
Deer eat all year, and then just to sock up for that one time of the moment where they can in the season. Then once they're done, I mean, they've got rid of all their reserves and energy, and then it's back to restocking. Down here, it's like nonstop.
All
It's like
year long.
yeah.
That's what I think it is. I think it's got to be the fact that they don't have to hibernate. I mean, if they hibernate or brumate, it's like a couple days at a time because that water temperature is going to maintain a lot warmer than the air temperature. And all they got to do is hop up and bask down here, which is something that's kind of different than a lot of their other parts of the range is that they bask quite frequently down here. It's pretty cool.
I was going to ask this question. How did it relate to your work in Louisiana? Did you also do reproductive work on them as well?
Absolutely. That was kind of the big thing was comparing it between the two spots. And there was like some gaps because it was kind of hard to come to Florida and sample and then go back to Louisiana and sample at the exact same time, especially being a broke grad student. Very hard to do that and make that trip and get funding for the research all at the same time. So we did the best that we could. But I basically got a May, June, and July sampling period and a little bit of an August in Louisiana. And then I got like a May, June, July in Florida. So I've got similar comparative stuff. Some months I only caught like 2 terrapins, which in a scientific aspect is kind of limiting because it doesn't really give you like a full broad scope of what's happening. But when it's something that's never been done before, you think that can still kind of inform you on some stuff. But in Louisiana, they seem to follow trends closer to like the northern terrapins where basically July and August, they didn't really have any follicles left. So they probably weren't going to start loading up until that preceding fall and just do your typical single spring nesting season.
How do they handle like bromation and things of that nature over there?
I didn't do a whole lot of work with like the brumation in Louisiana, but it gets cool enough there. I mean, it's kind of ignorant on my end because I when I was looking for grad school, I was like, oh, I'm only going to do the Southeast United States. I was like, oh, Louisiana is going to be great because it's not going to get that cold. And cold to a South Florida boy is not cold to anybody else, but it's freezing for us. So I got up there in the 35-degree night, and I was just like, what's happening? So the terrapins obviously experience that too. So when you get those long winters, I mean, you get the full 4 seasons there. They go inactive for that late fall through the winter, and then come usually late February, maybe March, they start sort of perking up again, getting out there. I mean, you can find them still active
in the mud
in the early fall, but once it gets cold in those November, December months, they kind of go inactive.
Were you seeing them mainly like hunkering down in the mud and all that kind of stuff, buried like most of the time, almost stepping on them? Like, how would you actually relocate, finding compared to obviously the season where you actually out almost have to hunt them rather than the season where you're almost searching? It's almost kind of like a
So it's kind of a cool technique. My buddy Will Selman, he's at Millsaps College up in Mississippi, but he was working for the Louisiana Department of Wildlife at the same time. He was a big collaborator on a project. He would take us out on the airboat, and in Louisiana, it's really cool. They wrote a paper on this out in the marshes. You can see their trails in the mud, and then you can see this sort of wallow in the mud. So we'd go poke that wallow with a stick, and if you heard a clunk, oh, there's a terrapin. So you dip that in and scoop it up. It was really neat.
How deep, on average, just enough to where it gets a little bit cooler, maybe, or just
it's definitely enough to regulate temperature, but I don't know the exact depth. I bet you I can probably message you guys the paper that Will came out with. I bet you he takes super detailed notes, so I bet you he would have some of that information about how they were finding them and how deep. But I don't recall personally.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it's cool.
Huh. So what were you saying? One question I had was what kind of techniques as far as trapping and capturing safely, like what kind of things did you guys use to actually, because I know you can dive in a little bit of searching with the radio telemetry and stuff
Yeah.
like that, but also all the
Yeah.
different things you might not think about.
Yeah. So for the terrapins, it was mostly we did a kind of combo of like on the airboat and just visually searching. Sometimes you see terrapins swimming, sometimes you'd see their muck burrows, and then we would set these nets called fyke nets. They're like basically like a big hoop, kind of like a catfish trap, if you've ever seen those before. Yeah. So they've got like an opening on one end, and then there's this sort of lead line that brings, if anything hits it, they can either go one way or the other. So you set up fyke nets on either side of that lead line. The terrapins would hit it, and then they'd jet to this side or they jet to that side across the channel, and then they would end up in the traps. So that's one of the main ways. And then opportunistic hand capture is always good when you can just walk around and see them kind of up at the.
And you were was obviously time frame is time is crucial. Were you on site, holding it down just in case?
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. So what we do is we'd set the traps, and then through LDWS permits, like they could set them, they could keep them up for like 12 to 24 hours. So we'd set the traps, they'd have floats, and then we'd come back like the next morning and check them. And then sometimes we'd have a couple dozen terrapins between 5 or 6 traps set up in the marsh.
Wow. Now, how did you just went one by one conducting? Well, what's the main? So if you were to capture one, what's the main procedure to go about?
So for this study, or for just like turtle studies in general, like
like if you were to have all the just in general, like whether it's shell length, male, female, all the basic kind of essentials that you'd almost go over just to kind of say, even if you want to pit tag one or
Well, let me show you this here. All right, you recognize that? What species is that?
That's an ornate, looks like.
Yep. It's a North Florida ornate shell that a buddy of mine found dead just on the side of a road. I think it was either roadkill or a predator, maybe a raccoon got it. I can't remember what he said on this one.
Like a big girl.
Yeah, it was a big girl. There was dried up eggs inside of her, so whatever got her didn't even eat the eggs, which is a bummer. But so what we do, because imagine this is a live turtle, right? Just do your best imagination. All right. So when we catch our turtles, first thing we do is we take your typical measurements. We measure the carapace length. So we'll do like a straight carapace length from the maximum length at the top to the maximum length at the bottom. We'll do what's called a minimum carapace length, where we kind of measure like in the notch. I'm trying to find my camera. There's like the notch right here at the front of the shell. And that just gives us a diversity, because sometimes these animals get damage to their shells, obviously. So if you've got multiple different measurements, that can kind of help you measure growth between things. We'll measure the bottom of the shell, the plastron, all sorts of things like that. We'll get typical width, height. Terrapin, something really important to get is as a head width measurement. Because as you folks probably know, there's a big difference between male and female terrapins. Females usually have these big monster heads. They call that megacephaly, and then males have this microcephalic, tiny little head, and that kind of helps them shift between eating different food items in the wild.
I was just about the brain now.
The male only thinks about one thing.
Dude, that's not what I was getting at.
I think we're all well aware of that, so it's probably something to do with that too. But it also has to do with the stuff that terrapins eat. The females, I think, as you folks probably, I know you guys know a lot about terrapins, so if I'm being basic, let me know. But we know they eat a lot of big, like shelled things. So those females have that giant masticating upper palate. So we get that measurement for comparison, because cool enough, like at really small sizes, you can kind of make a really good estimate on male versus female based on the head shape. Females start showing that megacephaly pretty early.
Would you say that, also would have to do with, since the females take the brunt end of needing all the nutrition, all that food for carrying, that they more benefit from that kind of aspect for feeding than a male typically would, always being out.
I think that definitely would play a role. There's a lot of work to be done on this head size thing. It's been talked about in map turtles, which are close related. But I mean, being able to crush something that's full of calcium that you could then use to form eggs, there's got to be some sort of relationship to that megacephaly and being able to prep eggs. But then again, it's kind of this thing where not all populations show it. Or at least don't show it to the same degree. Like a lot of like South Florida diamondback terrapin females, like they've got big heads that are, about this big. But then you go to Louisiana and their heads are this big and they can't even tuck them in their shell. They're so big.
Yeah, them big freaking monster jaws, you know.
I posted a photo on the old Diamondback Terrapin group page before it got shut down, but it showed this female that her head was 55 millimeters wide, which I'm bad with converting. That's 5.5 centimeters. So that's like almost like 3 inches wide.
What?
Yeah,
almost. Yeah. So, and her head was so big when I was taking blood samples that she got tired. She basically couldn't hold her head up out of the water for any longer, so her head just went and slunk down because it was so big and heavy.
Wow.
Man, at what point is that not a good trait to have?
Like that's like snap a turtle, just sit on the bottom and wait for your food to come by.
Right?
You just clunch down.
Yeah, it was monster. I've never been bit by a female terrapin, thankfully, but that's not a mouth I would want anywhere near me.
So have you been bitten by a male?
Yes, plenty of males. Because I'm a little careless when I'm measuring and marking males because I'm not going to get like maimed. But with females, I'm extra careful because those jowls are big.
I find it funny you say that. At least in the captive bred ones that I have, my males are a lot more chill than my females. My females come out ready to take a chunk out of your hand, and my males are just like.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, they're all willing to bite. I'm less willing to be bitten by an adult female terrapin than I am by a
I've never had an issue of biting other than the male. The males always seem a little bit, skittish, but the females, I mean, as long as you feed them enough, they'll be your best friend, I think.
Sure.
If you want to see a video of somebody who's willing to get bitten by their female terrapins, you can go watch Dan the Guppy Man on YouTube. He has an entire video where he just lets them bite him, which is insane to me.
No thanks, buddy. You, but I'm going to take a pass on that one. Hard pass.
So what are some other things, internally wise, did you find out as far as, when it comes to eggs and clutches and, different kind of things like that?
We're kind of working on that stuff now. There's a lot of stuff that is sort of in progress, and I don't want to give too much away because some of this is like really new stuff that has never been published before. So don't want to get scooped. There's people out there that would really like to scoop and run with a project idea, but we're finding some really interesting stuff in terms of clutch size and egg size down here. Same thing with both terrapins and box turtles. A lot of good data with the box turtles. And some good stuff about like their habitat use, all sorts of interesting things.
You think it, because, you hear about, them holding on to, sperm for, X amount of time. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. It's one of my favorite things that turtles can do, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about because students are usually just mind blown when they figure out that can happen. That's just a really cool thing that these females have these like sperm storage mechanisms, and it depends on the species where the actual storage happens. And there's still some debate about where exactly in the reproductive tract it's stored. Like they think it's maybe different, like in soft shells and in the side neck turtles than it is in like the typical North American cryptodire turtles. But basically those females can store sperm from multiple different males and then fertilize their clutch with multiple different fathers and just like drastically increase the genetic diversity of that clutch. I mean, that's just like the coolest thing.
So it actually draws from many different ones. It's not just one specific, even if.
So usually if you ever seen a terrapin in the wild during the breeding season, a female, usually the female's never alone. Usually there's at least one. The most I've seen is 4 males chasing down one female terrapin. That made for a great field sampling day because all I had to do was just sit there and got you, got you, got you, and I got 5 samples from one little spot. But like all of those males, like one will fertilize her, and then the other one could potentially do it as well. And there may be some internal cellular mechanisms that maybe allow for like better sperm to fertilize, but we still don't know that kind of stuff. There may be some stuff on other species, but as far as terrapins go, I don't know if they've documented that yet.
So how does that dig? Go ahead, Cody. No, you started first.
I was going to ask, have you done any work studying the males reproductively? Because that's been something that's interested in me.
Yeah. I've done shows sometimes, and why don't they? Like, I've seen every one of my males show, which I've talked to other people, like, I've never seen it ever.
So,
it's not something you want to see.
There's actually a way you can get male terrapins to show every time. It's kind of it's a funny thing. There's actually a technique. So if you've got ambiguous males, and it works with most hard-shell turtles, at least freshwater turtles, if you just put a little bit of gentle pressure. Actually, let me get my shell out. So this is obviously a female.
But you know, I thought you were gonna grab a real turtle. No. This we gotta block this, yo.
Yeah, but like you know, they like to poke their heads out and they like to poke their arms out. If you just kind of gently press that in and just apply a little bit of gentle pressure, sometimes that will trigger an inversion response and they'll pop out. So if you've got one that's kind of an ambiguous male-female, kind of like young stage, sometimes you can get them to pop and you can actually see them invert the phallus, which is kind of weird that's been found out and people do that, but it's really helpful when you're trying to sex.
Now, does that actually...
The head goes straight in or to the side?
Just want to gently kind of like just how they tuck their head in naturally. You just want to kind of gently allow them to do that and just put just a small bit of pressure. And then
on top of their head?
Their head and like their arms. You're kind of just like packed like when the turtle tucks in to kind of get away from a predator, you know, they kind of tuck like that. When they do that, if you just apply a little bit of pressure to that, sometimes that triggers the
it's almost like an ink.
Yeah. But you know, when you've seen one of those things, it's kind of like, okay, a predator might get scared of that. So
that's what I'm saying, like, dude, like, because it's just almost like a black, just like gonna come out and grab you or something. But that's interesting, though. It's almost like that. Like,
weirdly enough, I've got a lot of photos of turtle or reproductive structures on my phone because it's so fascinating, the diversity of the shapes, like soft shell turtles. Have you ever seen a soft shell turtle phallus? It looks like the face hugger from Alien. What is that even for?
No wonder why the females don't want nothing to do with you all.
Right, exactly. Turtles are certainly not the most romantic things, and you can't blame the females for running away from some weirdo like that. So,
now, can the females, like, how does it? Can they? Because I've heard both, a little bit of either or. Like, say a female gets, you know, multiple or whenever. Mm-hmm. Can she have any kind of control on dictating when she wants to lay?
Like release the sperm to fertilize it? Yeah, I don't know if it's like she can flip a switch and say, oh, okay, now it's gonna happen. There's probably an environmental cue that triggers a response that allows that sperm to then fertilize the egg.
Based upon season, environment, timing is just
because, as you probably know, with some of the breeding of the captive ones, they're gonna do is mate once, and then 3 or 4 years later, you can still have viable clutches of eggs after one fertilization, and just whatever environment cues that it's time to lay those eggs, then that's it. So it's got to be an environmental mechanism. It's probably related to hormones, which I would love to figure out the hormonal mechanism for it, but it costs a lot of money to run hormonal assays. So
it's probably such a survival thing, if anything. I mean, especially when you're considering terrapins and how you know, most of the southern, you know, you get the mangrove and all the ones that are so like the population's just diminishing. I mean, how many of those females are relying on that kind of thing if there's no male to be found?
And then you add to the fact, you know, the whole climate change idea where like more females are being produced because of higher temperatures. I mean, it's a good thing that they can just encounter one male and then reproduce 3 or 4 years successfully, because that can really kind of help, not offset, but at least help benefit continued reproduction in that regard. So
do the males have any kind of specific survival instincts on the way they go about, since they're more out water, you know, open water kind of thing, as far as the females are more a little bit tucked in? Like, do they
I mean,
say hurricanes or anything like that, like almost a natural instinct, do they go for burrowing also, or like
I would bet they would. I don't know personally, but there was an interesting we had the Diamondback Terrapin Working Group meeting up in Jacksonville, Florida last October, which was awesome. So it's like terrapin biologists from all over Florida come in, and some even from the Gulf Coast states come in, and we all kind of talk about what we found in the last couple of years. It's like every 3 years they meet or so. And there was a really cool study when what was the name of that big hurricane that hit the Panhandle a couple years ago?
Not Irma.
Not Irma.
Michael.
It was the big one. I can't think of it, but it was
Michael.
It was a big one. It hit the Panhandle really bad. I can't remember the name. It might have been Michael, but I'm not sure. But they just by happenstance had found a couple of terrapins a couple of days before it hit, and they put a satellite tag on one of the females, and they were able to get data from her before the hurricane, like just prior, what she did, and then afterwards. And she went into like a little quiet bay and hunkered down while the storm passed through, and then was out moving like it was every other day. So they certainly can detect that barometric pressure change or some sort of environmental factors that allow them to kind of deal with that intense weather. So I'm sure males are probably similar. I don't know if they do the exact same tactic, but I'm sure they would do something similar.
It'd be interesting.
I want to bring this up now that you said that. I talked to a guy, and he's no expert, but he theorized that the reason some people aren't having success breeding mangroves outside of Florida is because they need to recognize that barometric change in the atmosphere and experience those highs and lows from things like hurricane season.
Right. I wouldn't doubt it. I would certainly be on it. Yeah, because mangroves are supposed to be like one of the toughest of the subspecies to keep because they're specialists. I mean, they are basically open water pelagic turtles that live on like little mangrove barrier islands. They're in the water way more than the others, and if they're not in the water, they're buried in the muck on like those islands in the Keys.
Right.
I mean, they're the most extreme terrapin out there. They're a true extremophile. I mean, they're living in pure seawater, so they've got those giant size lacrimal glands for salt excretion, and
so they can handle a lot more salinity. Obviously,
absolutely, yeah. I can't remember the paper off the top of my head, but there's a paper that compared the size of like the lacrimal glands between some subspecies, and I think they found that the Keys terrapins, the mangroves, had much larger glands than the others, which would make sense.
I remember Jordan Gray telling me when, from his knowledge, when they'd find mangroves in the Keys, they'd always be, bunkered down in mucky salt water, and the salinity level of that salt water was insane. Like it was not brackish.
No, it's not brackish. It's like pure salt or hypersaline, as we call it. Like, I mean, even in some of the terrapins, the ornates we work with down here, we find them in areas that are like 51 parts per thousand, which is hypersaline. So they can certainly handle it, being in like non-brackish water. But those mangroves just they are intense. The stuff.
And you think even with the trying to keep them like in a captive setting, with the UV and lighting, they're used to such a harsh, the most intense, like you said, like it's almost you can't mimic that almost.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing so I think there's got to be some sort of cue with wet or dry season that would be the triggering response for reproduction in those, because even though it's not as cold, up in here in Southwest Florida, we still get those little cold spells, which are often just good indicators for, hey, it's time to ovulate your eggs. It's time to do this. Whereas down there, it's the full on tropics in the Keys.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much you know about turtles in the tropics in general, but you go to Central South America where they don't have these cold seasons, it's just dry or wet. All of their reproductive cycles are based on wet and dry season. The wet season, some of them will start right as the wet season or right before the wet season begins. Some will start just after. It just depends. It's all predicated on wet and dry. So I think rainfall, temperature all have to play a big role on that, and barometric pressure could even play a role because we know how frequently storms and things like that form over the Keys. So who knows? Maybe that could be an environmental factor as well.
And you think with the hardy, do you think, because a lot of people talk about how much the wild caught are so much more hardier, when it comes to like issues or prone to issues, but like almost way more able to bounce back from shell rot or this and that.
Sure.
Like, is that just like a naturally just being out in the environment itself that it just in the genes, they just grow that? I don't even know what you call that, so I'm trying to ask you what they call it to make it more hardy. Like,
I'd say that could be just an immune response because typically some of those animals, they developed and grew up in a wild environment where they were hit with every microbe and everything in an environment possible. So they probably were able to develop an immune response that a captive animal may not be able to have. But I honestly that's kind of out of my realm of expertise.
What about as far as acclimation? Have you seen, longevity wise, like, say you have a rescue or something like that, or you rehab,
Sure.
have you, because I've heard about like a 2-year rule, kind of rule of thumb, as far as like if you're trying to acclimate a turtle that used to be in the wild to, captive setting, to acclimate them and get them used to like that kind of setting. Is that kind of like a good gauge, a couple of years? I mean, I know it's not ever full on, but like,
Yeah, I mean, I almost think it's individual level. I think different individuals are going to be harder than others, but I honestly don't know if there's like a time frame. I will say that terrapins are a particular, like, we like in captivity, obviously they can make great pets and things like that, but moving them from the wild to captivity, I think their stress response is higher than some other species because they're specialists and because it's not like moving a reddish slider that can live in a puddle of water on the side of the road. These things going
over
from
water
to fresh water immediately or something like that, like there's going to be a stress response fully triggered. And I didn't personally work with stress hormones in terrapins, but there's been some interesting work done in the stress they experience. And it'll be really interesting to look at how their stress is related to moving from wild to captive environments, and just seeing how that predicates. And that might help.
what are key indication of stress? Just a lot of frantic movement and unnatural, like,
So the
not
thing
eating.
is stress may not be visually apparent in animals,
Mhm.
because the second you show you're stressed or you're wounded, that's when you lose, and that's when you're usually near the end of your life. We measure stress from a physiological standpoint by looking at a hormone called corticosterone. It's equivalent to what mammals have called cortisol. So like with your fight or flight response, right, that has to do with adrenaline and things, but also with your cortisol and things like that. So when we're stressed out, and through various immune responses, our cortisol levels shoot up.
Yeah.
Terrapins and other reptiles, that corticosterone shoots up. So they may look not stressed, but physiologically, internally, they may be very stressed. And something we know about increased corticosterone is that it lowers immune response. So if you're seeing like animals that have like constant like issues with infection, so on and so forth, there's a good chance that their stress levels are really dropping them immune wise. We see it a lot with like tortoise groups in captivity. Are you folks familiar with mycoplasma?
I've heard of it, yeah.
It's the classic upper respiratory or runny nose syndrome that you see in tortoises. Like tortoises may go years looking perfectly healthy, you don't see it, but then you move them to a new habitat or you move them to a suboptimal habitat, and all of a sudden bubbles out of their nose, eyes, and things like that.
I saw a wild gopher with it.
Yes, it's usually a natural part of their nasal passages. It's a bacteria that lives there. It's there, but when they're stressed, that lowers their immune response, and that can allow some of those bacterial things to sort of go out of control. And not only can it be respiratory, but that can be the same for like their gut and internal fauna. So you can see a lot of issues with just an animal being in suboptimal conditions and being stressed out.
That's interesting.
Which that kind of goes back to the basic idea, like that every exotic vet tells you, right? I mean, if you keep your animal right, you pay the money to keep your animal right, then it's going to do well. But if you're keeping them suboptimally and they're stressed out, things happen. And that's not to say that every time an animal gets sick, that's because they're stressed out. I mean, it happens, right?
I mean, because like say they're eating, they're fine. I mean, everything. What can they just be also like just an active,
we know there are some tortoises and turtles that have distinct personalities, not quite like a human personality, but a good friend of mine, her name's Andrea Curlo. She's a great turtle physiologist, does a lot of hormone stuff on like radiated tortoises and stuff. She did a really cool study where she found like that some tortoises in captivity were super skittish and had higher stress levels all the time, and they were just personally very turtle. So I mean, you probably all have friends who's perpetually stressed out all the time. There may be a similar anecdote with turtles. Are you looking?
I was thinking which way I need to look to make sure I'm looking at somebody other than, because I got a giant mirror over here. Because if I look that way, I'm just looking at myself.
So, but yeah, so I think it's got to be an individual thing as well.
Yeah, because that's the one thing I've noticed. If anything, like I've kept, most of us have kept a wide variety, but the terrapin, like, dude, they're so. I don't care. You can listen to, make a post and you have 20 different responses, but ultimately, like, you take everyone with a grain of salt. But ultimately, you got to analyze your own turtle for what it is.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, anything else? Other cool facts?
Cool facts. I mean, shoot, I could list.
I'm curious about the box turtles, man.
Okay.
Florida box turtle is one of my top 3 favorite species.
Yeah. So I know I said terrapins are my favorite. Box turtles are creeping right now. They're creeping up on them. Just because we're finding so much cool stuff about what these box turtles are doing. It's just
come on.
insane. I'll give you a little
bit more time.
I'll give you a little hint, which a lot of box turtle keepers and people that work with box turtles in other places are probably pretty aware of. I mean, when you talk to like the general public, you know, everybody's like, "Oh, box turtles, keep them on land. Keep them on land. They can't swim." Not the case.
I keep mine in a 50-50 setup.
Yeah. I'll say we're tracking some of these animals and we're finding some of them fully submerged, like submarined underwater. So it's insane.
They got some insane capabilities, huh?
Yeah, it's insane. I think the first time I ever experienced box turtles being able to do this isn't from my project, but I was up in Louisiana and we were looking for timber rattlesnakes. Canebrake rattlesnakes. They about crucified me in the South when I called their canebrakes timbers. But canebrake rattlesnakes.
Timbers are up where I'm from and up in the mountains and
right. You know, I always knew them as timbers from books, but when I got up there and they're like, "What did you call my snake?" all right. Canebrakes. But anyways, we were looking for those and we were looking for them like in this dried out ravine. And there was like these little like residual pools of water that were like 5 or 6 feet deep. And I saw a box turtle, just a Gulf Coast box turtle, just floating and swimming in this casually swimming in this little pool. I was like, "What's going on?" So I went over and you see a box turtle and you think, "Oh, it's how is that going to run from me?" So I get over to it and I was go down to grab it. It looks at me and then it like submerges the whole submarine and goes down, 6 feet deep underwater. Doesn't come back up.
6 feet.
Approximately, maybe deeper even. This puddle was super deep and you could just barely make out the visual of this animal at the bottom of this semi-murky thing. This thing dived down so deep. So that got me thinking. And I come back down to Florida and I find out these things are full on, basically semi-aquatic, not just terrestrial species. And they're adaptive and kind of a generalist where they can use a fully terrestrial habitat. But if there's a little water around, they're not afraid of that either.
So, I mean, what is that? How's that a native? How's that a natural, like, what separates them from any other, I don't want to say tortoise, but like, box turtle tortoise, the more of you think of a land species, like what separates them? Why would they have that adaptability since they're so wide ranged anyway?
It goes back to their evolutionary history. Box turtles are what we call imided turtles, if you're familiar with the term. That's a family of turtles that basically is all of your pond turtles. So your terrapins, your cooters, your sliders, your chicken turtles, your wood turtles, your spotted turtles, all of your classic turtles that you can think of that aren't soft shells or snappers, essentially, right? And are not tortoises, are imideds, at least here in the United States. When you go other places, there's other groups. But box turtles are imided turtles. So their evolutionary history traces back to aquatic turtles. So what has happened over years and years and years, these turtles have moved on to land from an aquatic existence. So they probably have some residual characteristics or traits that allow them to be successful in aquatic environments, or they've re-evolved these characteristics over time to facilitate aquatic survival.
Yeah, predation, everything, because they're so more susceptible, almost like a here I am. You might as well just hold a sign like, "Come get me if you want."
I'm curious about something. Since I do keep a couple Florida box turtles, I'm curious, what is the environment that you're finding them thrive the best in? So when I want to replicate that in my backyard or things of that nature, like what are you seeing?
We're studying them in like 4 or 5 different habitat types. So when I say they're a generalist, that means they can generally do well in basically most habitats you throw at them down here.
Okay.
So we're seeing them in some of the spots. We call it a pine flatwoods habitat. I don't know if you're familiar. You probably have done a lot of deer hunting in a pine flatwoods habitat.
Mm-hmm.
So you see your slash pine trees and the saw palmetto scrub below it. Classic deer hunting habitat, right? Box turtles love that. So you got low-lying sort of saw palmetto,
Yeah, it's crazy. Sorry, man. Like now that you just literally put that picture in my head, like that was like my premier hunting spot. And that was like where you always found, you know, either dead
Yeah.
or alive. They were just always they weren't ever in like a random field.
Oh, right. I like that. And they like that because those saw palms, you've probably experienced this. I mean, they provide a lot of protection.
Yeah.
If you walk through a saw palm, you walk through a saw palm because you get cut up real good. And the box turtles, they can basically tuck themselves underneath those things and be protected not only by their shell, but by those kind of things. So they love that. And they love like pine litter and things. Low-lying shrubs are a big spot that they like. So if you get any sort of like low-lying grasses and things like that for setups, those are good. But yeah, like
what are the other habitats that you were saying?
So pine flatwoods, and then they kind of get into like oak rosemary scrub habitat. So those are kind of like sort of hammocky. So they got like the oaks that kind of block out some light and things like that. But then you still got some saw palm. Saw palm seems to be a very good resource for them to have. And you've got these other habitats. They're called scrub habitats, which is kind of a misnomer because when you think scrub, you think like non-productive and bad. You think the TLC song, right? But scrub habitat down
I'm
here.
so glad you just made that reference.
I know I had to.
I was gonna say it. I'm not gonna lie.
But
I would fit in because like I just shaved my beard the other day. Now I don't fit in with you guys, man.
I know, yeah, it's the beard club, man. This is I call this my Quentin Quarantino beard. So this is what I'm going out in quarantine.
I did not have a beard before COVID, so
yeah, my wife is not thrilled about it. By the way, I've shaved it once, but it's so much better in the field because the mosquitoes and no-see-ums can't get through this thick lusciousness, so it helps. But anyway, it's called scrub habitat, but it's not really a good name for it because it's super productive habitat and it's super important habitat. They're trying to change the name to some scrub habitats to ancient fire forest, which sounds really cool. It would also make a really cool band name, I personally think, ancient fire forest. But they're these habitats that have to sort of rely on burning. So they're pyrophytic. So the burn comes through, it clears out the underbrush, and then you see a boost in productivity. So those scrub habitats often kind of have like sandy soils, kind of some open patches where serve as sort of cruising ways for turtles. And then they've got a lot of dense, low-lying vegetation that they hang out in. And that can vary from palms to things like muley grass, which are kind of like your fountain grasses that you can get with lows and things like that. So I always recommend putting some of that stuff in there if you're trying to mimic a natural habitat.
Now, have you noticed, speaking of, from north to south, with the box turtles, since more, you got such a smaller window up north with the water temperature and them, even if aquatic, so you find them maybe a surrounding but less in. Do they have a certain temperature gauge to where they can only withstand a certain,
that I don't know, and I've actually not done any work on box turtles north of Florida. I've played with a few that I found crossing in Louisiana, like caught them, took photos and things like that, but I've not done any like official work. All of my box turtle work is in Florida.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
now that you say that,
but I know they do some. I would imagine that there is sort of a temperature that's going to be like, okay, shut down time. But down here, we don't get it. We were catching turtles. We radio tagged our first 10 turtles from November to January. So, which is, some of the colder months of the year. And we tracked them throughout March and February. And these things were gallivanting around like nothing had ever changed. The temperature was not a problem for them. But temperatures were rarely getting below 40. I mean, I think there was one night it got like 39 at night. We are finding that some of these box turtles do like gopher tortoise burrows, which is really cool. They, it's a little bit of turtle on turtle love. Gopher tortoises, as you probably know, they dig these big burrows where bunches of can live in, and we're finding that some of our box turtles do like to just hang out even just inside the burrow. Sometimes they go down deeper and we can't get a really good signal because sometimes gopher tortoise burrows are 10 or 20 feet deep. So we know the signal's coming from there. So they may be using those to kind of regulate temperatures. We haven't found a lot of them in there, but we've definitely found them making use of burrows.
I'm curious, are you finding more males or females? And I guess this is kind of to bounce off your idea about the climate change and female terrapins?
Yeah. So we are definitely female biased at one of my populations. It's too soon to say that is climate related. You need a lot more data.
Right.
Just like throw something out there because then one newspaper gets it and it goes sensationalist, right?
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
And then all of a sudden, a bunch of other scientists are yelling at me. They're like, "Why would you say that?" I'm like, "I didn't say it. I promise."
Yeah.
But right now our ratio is more female to male. It's probably, I'd say, like 3-to-1 male. Yeah, but that's with this project with the box turtles is still very early. This particular project we just started in January, so we've only been going at it for like 6 months.
What about with your terrapins?
The terrapin ratio is about 50-50.
Wow, that's good. That's good.
Which is good. Yeah, which is good.
Yeah, we need all the males we can get right now.
Yep. Well, and we're finding sort of the opposite with sea turtles. I tell you, I make fun of sea turtles, and I keep going back to sea turtles. But if you go over to the east coast of Florida, Jeanette Weineken's lab over at FAU did some stuff where they would pull a couple of eggs or a couple of undeveloped eggs out of some nests, and they would sacrifice the hatchlings inside, and they would go and basically look at what gonads they were developing. Was it ovaries or was it testes? And they found that like females were dramatically higher than males on the East Coast. So that's some direct evidence. And you'd expect sea turtles to be really affected by it because of where they nest. I mean, open beaches, sometimes a lot hotter. So thankfully, some species may be able to mitigate for that because of the places they choose to nest, and that's actually another project I'm working on right now. It's not my project, but I'm helping a buddy of mine at USF. He's basically looking at like light exposure and temperature of turtle nests throughout the state of Florida, and it could be something interesting to compare Florida versus northern populations to see if there may be some sort of behaviors where they can basically sort of mitigate for climate change in more tropical areas and lay in shaded areas to sort of help with those sex ratios.
Yeah, that's what I was actually going to ask you about. Some people say, you need, 80 some degrees, for them to even, want to feel like nesting or something like that, or just that warm sand. But, it's almost biased compared to, if you're talking about, sex determination also. It's like, so there has to be some kind of give there to be able to but that's the beauty about nature. It's the ultimate,
life finds a way, right?
Yeah, we can try to figure out all we want, and we'll continue to do that the rest of our lives. But nature always finds a way to survive, and as long as we're kind of feeling like that we're making an impact in any way we can, I think it's not some big huge thing. Like you do all this research, and it's the subtle little things that make the biggest pivotal moments. And you gotta love what you do, man. So it definitely shows in everything you've talked about and discussed. And I mean, I was not to say I'm being biased compared to anyone else that we've had prior to, but I was pretty like locked in because it's just so much interesting, that when you're especially someone that's hands on and doing the stuff and not just casually. So we appreciate your work doesn't go unnoticed, bro.
I appreciate that. I appreciate
I think this is as we are wrapping up this episode, I think this is a perfect time for you to talk about how you guys can get some support and what you're working on and how people can donate, man. So go ahead, man. This is your floor.
I don't know. Will the screen names kind of show when you do the live? When you do the podcast? So I put my my tag on Instagram for the project there. We're at the SWFL, the Southwest Florida Turtle Project. So if you want to follow along with the research that we're doing there, we post photos up a couple times a week of stuff we're getting into. A lot of stuff showing me and my students actually out in the field, and just kind of keeps you updated on the work that we're doing. On that specific Instagram page, there is a link to our GoFundMe as well. We've got some funding from our school. Oh, there we go. Nice.
Follow.
There it is. So we got some funding from the college. They did some great support, but as stuff, new ideas pop up, new needs pop up. So we always are welcoming any sort of donations. I'm not too proud to beg, so any sort of donation helps, whether it be just a little bit, tags, whatever.
I just want to put this on here because, like, you see all those commercials, with the sad puppies, and
Yeah.
it's like, dude, come on, what, you're gonna do that for a donation? But look, guys, if this doesn't need and call for a donation,
Right?
like, come on, like,
That's a
come
one-armed
on,
terrapin.
come
Help the
on,
one-armed
guys,
terrapins. Come on.
come on, show some love, yo. Sorry, I had to take advantage of that moment.
Yeah,
That's all for you.
I appreciate the shout out, but yeah, any sort of help is great. We appreciate it. We've been blessed that the Florida Fish and Wildlife FWC has been very supportive of our work as well. We got a lot of good people in there that are helping us out with some supplies and things. So it means we're doing something good with this project, and we're hopefully gonna really help with the conservation of not just terrapins and box turtles, but project is looking at every species in South Florida. Essentially, we're trying to do population surveys just to get an idea of numbers. We're trying to look and see how human impacts are causing issues, poaching, habitat destruction, etc., how that's affecting populations in Southwest Florida. And the more help we can get, the better we can do that.
Hey, let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
I hear this Southwest Florida thing, and I have to admit, I grew up in Central Florida, and I didn't realize there was a South Florida and a Southwest Florida. What is your range when you're referring to Southwest Florida, if that makes sense?
So so when we initially started the project, it was basically just going to be like Fort Myers area, but the Southwest Florida Turtle Project now covers the entire southern Gulf, basically Tampa all the way down. So that's where most of my stuff does. But I grew up in Fort Myers, so the idea was, it'd be like my hometown. But now, things change and it spreads. So we're basically, my permits cover as far inland as Alachua County, and they go all the way out to all of those Gulf coasts. So I can sample in all of those places, and it's where the research will be done. So
that's where I'm at, in Alachua County.
Nice. So very good.
No, we didn't talk about this in the podcast. Maybe a future episode.
Sure.
The diversity amongst the ornates that you see in Tampa in comparison to Fort Myers. I mean that's definitely another episode you might have to have them on for, Ed.
Sure.
Yeah, just go look at Stumpy. I mean, look, that's the classic example. It's almost like that's the mixture you see in between that and the mangrove. You get more of the diversity of the mangroves, and
we get phenotypes that are your typical ornate. We get phenotypes that are mangrove. We get phenotypes that are Mississippi. We get phenotypes all over the place. Like they've got full-on mustaches down here. It's on some of the phenotypes. So that's where I'm kind of a snob when it comes to subspecies. I'm like, well, subspecies. I mean, when you get some spots, everything there could be a different subspecies. Like when I was in Louisiana, we found stuff that you could have probably considered a northern terrapin phenotypically. Like, man, is this subspecies stuff really what it is? Man, I get what it's for, but yeah, I'm just a little bit of a snob, I guess.
Hey, we'll have to talk about that on a future episode too, man.
Sure.
We'll
actually, we want to have the other Jordan also, So this might be a very good back and forth debate. We can just Cody, we could just get some popcorn and just be like,
well, like I said, Jordan Gray likes to say he's the Turtle Jordan, but it's only because he's more handsome, more experienced, and works for a broad turtle organization. That's the only reason he may have.
Well, I mean, you just use the terms luscious and all this other stuff to this, so you were definitely trying to up your game up.
Let's try it. I saw his show a few weeks ago, so I was like, I got to bring my A game.
Come on, bro. Well,
you definitely did, man.
This is actually, this one I think they can get any more, interesting. But that's the beauty about just being able to talk and have conversation, and I know a lot of people probably just not only just learn more about you, but learn a lot in general, which is the key aspect of education and why we do what we do. Because the more appreciation you get for something, I mean, when next time you see one, you just think a little bit more than just, oh, there's a turtle, know. So it's
100%. Well, thanks for having me, folks. I appreciate the shout out, and it was great chatting with you. I mean, I could chat turtles anytime. So
we will
do it again.
Well, guys, we've come to the end of episode 9. We're glad you guys are continuing to support us. We're glad that Jordan agreed to come on. This has been another episode of What the
Show.
There we go. Podcast. And there we go. And we'll see you next week. I think we'll have another great guest on. We've been very blessed to have people that have continued to agree to support us and come and chat turtles, man. I gotta admit, Jordan, I never thought we'd get to episode 9. You know, I was kind of like, man, people aren't gonna want to watch people talk about turtles, but here we are. Maybe you'll be back in the fall sometime. Who knows?
109, huh? We'll see.
109 would be nice. Appreciate it, and you guys have a great evening.
You too. Be blessed.
Thanks again, folks.